Super. Before we get started, I just want to mention that my wife, Beth, is a Nichols, for those who've been around more than a couple of years. She grew up in the Marietta area with Lou and Thelma Nichols. And so if you want to get a quick update on her family after the service, please talk with her. This is our family now. We've got 3 children. Jonathan's about to turn 11, and Nathan just turned 9, and Caitlin just turned 6. And we've been missionaries with Word of Life for the last 15 years. And I just want to remind you of some of the background and then what we've been doing most recently. We've been working with the School of Youth Ministries in English. It's a program where our students are just basically high school graduates and above. They come and live at our program for 8 months at a time. 2 months, they're in 2-month segments, but up to 8 months at a time. The students are 18 to 30 years old. It's a very intensive, practical, hands-on ministry training program. And we teach Bible and we teach English. The way we do the English immersion is that our students for 12 hours a day are only allowed to speak English. They do that 4 days a week for 2 months at a time. If they speak any other language, we have to charge them $1. It's a discipleship immersion program because we're in a Christian environment. We have Christian staff and teachers. We teach the students how to do individual Bible study, and we do group Bible studies together, but we also teach them ministry skills. We teach them how to do evangelism, discipleship, youth ministry, and all kinds of leadership skills in the church. And they practice it not just hearing it in theory, but they actually do it in front of each other and then outside of the church or outside of the school. We have 3 kinds of students. We have students who are Christians. They want to grow in their walk with the Lord and grow in ministry skills. They might not be ready to go to seminary. If you go to seminary in most countries, that's a career track, really. You would get a professional Christian teaching job or preaching job, and so they might not be ready for seminary, but they want to grow in their ministry skills. We have cold Christians who will come, and they may have gone to church with someone as a child or visited church a few times, but they've walked away from their faith if they had it, and they're coming for the English. And then we have non-Christians who are coming. They're just coming specifically for the English and not the Bible. We first went to South Korea in 2003. We went there as teachers, and while we were there, the program grew a lot. It doubled in size, and almost every student that came in was giving their life to the Lord. If they were Christians, if they weren't Christians, almost every student was getting saved, and 30 students each year were going to the Bible Institute in Screen Lake, New York. We were really impressed with what was going on. We were excited, and when they invited us to stay and work with them, we stayed a second year. And we wanted to know, would this thing work in another country? And so that question led us to survey different countries. And in 2005, we agreed to go to Taiwan and start the Word of Life ministry in Taiwan, and specifically the SYME ministry in Taiwan. Steve Nichols and his family went to Japan, and over the next 10 years, SYME proved to be very effective at discipleship and evangelism in Asia. In Taiwan, where Beth and I went, we started the ministry in 2009. The SYME first class was in 2009. We had 5 students that first week, and it grew not hugely at first, but in that summer, we found out that Taiwanese had their summers off, most of the students. So we had 20 students that summer. And so the program began to grow. Every summer after that, we would have 30 to 40 students, which was a really great experience there. We had our students begin averaging, class sizes were averaging 12, 13, and then by the 3rd year, we were financially independent, so the students were paying all the bills except for the missionary's salary, and we had an average of 15 to 20 students each term. It was really growing. We had 30% of our students completely unchurched, completely unsaved, and they would come in, and they wouldn't know anything about the God of the Bible, the gospel, Jesus. One of the jokes, but the truth was we had a student ask us, so Abraham and Moses and Jesus, are they brothers? Are they related? What's the connection? They just didn't know the difference between, and Santa Claus, how does he fit in? So we got to explain who all these people were. And students who left our program, even if they hadn't accepted Christ at that moment, were able to share the gospel with others. We were doing what we called it evangelism through discipleship. And so we had students who weren't Christians who shared the gospel with other people who weren't Christians and actually led themselves to the Lord and led family members to the Lord. And so it was just a really powerful experience. In 2015, we had our staff bumped up from what was usually 4 or 5 people. It jumped up to over 15 people that were going to be living and working in Taiwan for 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. So we took a sabbatical at that time. So that was about 4 years ago. 3 years ago, we were in the States just taking a step back, asking what God would have us do. And while we were back, we began receiving a lot of requests from our organization to consider going to this country, to that country, to another country, to set up a similar kind of program. As we looked into those different countries, one country that was ready to go was Nicaragua. And that was a big shock for everybody, including us, that we would even consider going, but they tricked us. They asked me to go down and talk with them and see if they were really ready to go. And as it turned out, they thought they were ready, and I saw enough potential that they were ready to go, that we agreed that we would go and help them because they were ready to go. All the other countries were still a few years off. Nicaragua, it turns out, is in Central America. It's the largest country in Central America. It was or still may be the safest country in Central America. It's also the poorest country. In fact, it's the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I guess Haiti would be the poorest, and then Nicaragua. And Nicaragua in the 70s and 80s had a lot of political turmoil. And in 1990, they settled down and began holding elections. And so things stabilized, but the infrastructure was just a mess and very slow to develop. We went down there to work with a team, which the year that we moved down there, they had 7 families and 5 singles who were already working together. They were working with 8 churches or more. They were doing monthly training with how to do youth ministries, and they were doing youth ministries in those churches with the Word Life program. They were doing camping ministry in the summer and the winter. They were doing community outreaches each month, all day or all weekend outreaches into different communities and doing evangelism. And then we went to help start the English for Life ministry. Now, English for Life is basically SYME rebranded. And they came up with that phrase and this whole slogan there, and I thought it was a pretty good one. So English for Life is probably what I'll say the rest of this presentation. Nicaragua is very different from Asia, as you can imagine. And again, a lot of people were really confused. Wow, you spent all that time in Asia. But that was part of the challenge. Would Nicaragua, could a ministry that had worked in developed Asian countries work in a less developed, much poorer Latin American country? And the answer is yes, it did work. Nicaraguan students really loved teaching and leading Bible studies. They really enjoyed translating for visiting missionaries and foreign pastors. And they got very good at doing youth ministry and outreach. And there were definitely some challenges, not just differences, but some challenges working there. But with those challenges come great blessings. The Nicaraguan government spends between $75 and $100 per year per student for public education. That's less than $100 per student per year. So you can imagine their education system's not very advanced. And the students will go to school for half a day, the elementary in the morning, the high school in the afternoon. And only 1/3 of the students will ever finish high school. Their high school finishes when they're 16. It's only 11 grades. And I knew people that were really working to improve the education there. And they said that 50% of Nicaraguans in 6th grade would not be able to add, I can't read it from this far, I think it's 5 and 6. Let me turn around. 5 and 6 and give the correct answer in their head. Now, I don't know if that means they could do it on paper or with their fingers, but they couldn't just rattle off basic math, even in the 6th grade. So educationally, we had 2 groups of students. We had students that had gone to private schools and had a reasonably good education. And then we had half of our students who really didn't have good study habits, really didn't have good study at all. And they were now in an intensive English environment. So we had to really adjust our program to fit both groups. The program that we had fit really well with the higher group, but we had to make some curriculum adjustments to help the lower group. We also had to deal with some maturity as we now had younger students, again, and less trained students for this kind of rigorous educational atmosphere. But the students really stepped up and did a really great job. Our staff was used to doing event-style ministry on the weekends and on a certain day, on Sundays, Saturday conferences, 1 week pastors' conferences. They were used to event style, but we brought in a program where the students lived in their office space and lived in their workspace. And they really embraced the idea that they could be discipling young people between all the events. They really jumped into that. But again, a lot of adjustment to that. And then finally, we had all these foreign staff that had moved into their ministry, as well as we brought the short-term volunteers to work with them. And again, they were used to 1 week mission trips, 2 week mission trips, but just learning how to adjust and deal with foreigners. The team did a really great job. They really embraced the challenges and have really learned and done a great job adjusting. In this ministry, a big part of it is inviting people in the churches back here in North America and saying, you could work with us for 2 months at a time. If you want to come for a year, that'd be great too. But you could work with us for 2 months at a time, 8 weeks. And you would be teaching an English class. We'd have the materials for you. You'd be facilitating a discussion class. You would facilitate a discussion class where they would talk about their quiet time in the morning with a group of guys or a group of girls. And then you would also teach and facilitate an English Bible study. So 2 English classes, 2 Bible classes. And then your job is to eat with our students, hang out with our students, play games with our students, just be with our students and share your life. That's why this is a discipleship training center, because we live with our students. They experience more than just the classroom lecture, but they get to experience the casual conversation, working together, and everything else. So at every church, I'm looking for that one person or those 3 people who sometime, either this year or next year or in a few years, but you could start planning now, would you be available to come and work in one of our locations in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, or in Latin America, in this case Nicaragua? What would hold you back from doing that? Please talk to us. You might be surprised at how little is holding you back. In 2017, Word Life Nicaragua purchased the El Salero Sports Complex. It was originally developed by a foreigner. He wanted to make a community sports center. He did it on the outskirts of Managua, on the very edges, where Managua turns into some other little village. And he created this place that had a full-size baseball field, soccer field, and some nice playground equipment, some basketball courts. And the community would go there every day and just play and hang out. It's a nice park for them that normally wouldn't be available anywhere near them. And Word Life and Nicaragua, they bought this. They had a chance to buy this property as this foreigner moved back to the States. They're going to continue, and they have continued to keep it open as a community center, but they also want to develop it into a camping ministry. Before, we would rent a facility that was an hour from the city, and we'd rent it for 6 weeks at a time or 2 weeks at a time. If they wanted to hold a conference, they'd rent it, but then it'd take people 2 hours to get out there on public transportation. And they're going to develop this. It's right on the edge of Managua. In fact, within 40 minutes of that property, we're on the edge of Managua. There are 2 million people that live in Managua, and that's just to the east of our property. To the west, we have other towns and villages. It's instant. It also gave our ministry team instant access to a little community, that community. They'd been working in churches in the city. This was on the edge of the city, but now we began to focus and look at what are we supposed to be doing in this community. We have the community center. It's open. But what are we supposed to do? The ministry calendar is pretty full. The ministry team in Nicaragua is very active. They're not sitting around. They're always working. They're working hard. Well, I'll tell you how God answered that in a couple minutes, but this is a quick picture of our first graduating class. The students did really great. We learned a lot. They learned a lot. We had the second class start this year. We got about 10 weeks into it, 12 weeks into it. A really neat class. We had a missionary family from Nicaragua who wanted to work in South America that was there, a husband and a wife. We had a lady from Argentina that had joined us. We had people that were going to come and join us from Costa Rica. And we had some really neat interns come from the U.S. to work with us for a year or two. Things were going really, really well. And then on April 15th, Nicaragua began to experience some civil unrest in a way they hadn't seen since the 70s and the 80s. There began to be protests. The people were upset with some things the president had done, and they realized that it was time to really try to get his attention. And they were really upset by his response to their attempting to get his attention, and it involved a lot of violence and bloodshed. And the police disappeared from the streets, so it became less and less safe in the daytime as well as the nighttime. The students were protesting, and they were tearing up the cobblestone streets and building blockades, and so business shut down. Food became hard to get for a lot of the population, and we left. We were planning to leave in June, and we left about a week early because we had to. The week that we left, every missionary that we know left that country, either in the weeks up to that week or by the end of that week. Every missionary we know had left the country. So it's been a rocky summer for our friends who've worked in Nicaragua. In mid-July, the president forcibly removed all the blockades and told the protesters to go home or they would get shot. And so life resumed the veneer of normalcy. The people are still upset. The president's still trying to calm that down. They're still trying to figure out how to get rid of him. But the daily pattern is kind of back to normal. A lot of missionaries weren't able to go back. They'd waited all summer to see what would happen, and they had to decide, do we go back to the mission field? Do we find another mission field? Do we just make an unscheduled break in our plans this year? Some who had planned to go back for the summer were waiting till the very last minute, and then they went back. So we definitely want you to pray for the missionaries who went back to Nicaragua. We want you to pray for our team that was there and is there. And the answer to how did God want our team to work with our community, our community ended up being a safe place. The violence never came to our community. And so our ministry calendar got shut completely down. All the events got canceled. And so our team had to figure out, well, what are we going to do for ministry? What are we going to do every day just to try and have a normal life? And so those team members, they could get across town without being in danger physically, would meet at our ministry center, and they started doing outreach to that community. Not just having the people come in and exercise and do the things that they did, but they started providing Bible clubs and teaching times and just really going door to door and just meeting the neighborhoods. So now that things have stabilized, they're starting to see what they can do with the ministry calendar again. This week, or last week, they started the English for Life program up again. They want to do one final 8-week term with our old students and finish it up. And yeah, they're just, it's a fresh start. It's a troubled time. They need prayer for the things that I have up here. They do want to have camps start. Normally in December and January, they'll have 6 weeks of camp with 650 students that will come. And they will present the gospel to every single student one-on-one multiple times throughout the week that they're there. So these are some things you could pray about for our team. We just want to thank you for hanging with us as we have started out in South Korea and then went to Taiwan and did that ministry there, and then made this trip over to Nicaragua. And now we're still working on it. By the end of the month, I'd like to be able to share the project I'm working on next, but we're still working through some of the details. But we just wanted to give you that update, and thank you again for investing in us as missionaries, as your missionaries, and look forward to sharing more about what's coming soon. Now, for the rest of our time, this is going to be an easy message to listen to, especially in the beginning. You don't have to listen. You don't have to open your Bible. Just look up here and listen. I want to start out with a secret. Most of you think you know my name as Chris Steiner, but that's not really my real name. Nope. I want to tell you my story. When I was born, my parents gave me the name N-A-B-U, Nabu. That's right. I was the oldest son of a king, and my father was the man who started the great Babylonian Empire. And as I got older, I got to join the military, and as the crown prince of the king in the kingdom, I had great opportunities in that military. And this is my story. When I was young, we had a war against the nation of Egypt. And we went out to fight with them. And because I was a crown prince, I was given command. And I was actually the commander and the leader of the army when we defeated the Egyptians. The final battle at Carchemish. And when we won that battle, I got the message from home. Back in the capital, my father had passed away. And this was the news I'd been waiting for my whole life. I'll never forget that day. It was August 15th. And I gathered my most trusted servants, my most trusted advisors, and my most trusted friends, just a small group. And we raced across the desert for 26 days to get back to the capital so that I could be crowned king of our nation. And on September 6th, I became the greatest king. I became the king of the greatest nation on earth. When I became king, and as I began to see all that I was in control of, I met these 4 young men. They were Jewish men from an insignificant little country that we had taken over. But these 4 men were special. They were led by a man named Daniel. And when I talked with them, the wisdom that they had, we had trained them, we taught them, but the wisdom they had was different than the others. And their composure was different too. It was like they were used to standing before a king, even kings greater than I. I was the greatest king on earth at the moment. And they were just calm. It was different. It was special. But I was busy. I had a lot of things to do. So I sent them on to some place of service, and I forgot about them pretty quickly because I was building a great nation. About a year after I met them, I began to have some terrible dreams. I would wake up terrified. At first, I just told a few friends, but they couldn't help me. So I went to some of the more official people in my kingdom that were supposed to be wise and to know some things, and they couldn't help me either. And there was only one man who could help me. It was Daniel. See, Daniel, he came to me one day and he said his God had told me what my dream was and that he knew what the dream meant. And when he told me what the dream was, I knew he was right, that he was telling me the truth. Daniel told me about his almighty God. I didn't know what to think of that, but I knew that Daniel had told me the truth. So I made him one of my top advisors. But I was still very busy. I was building Babylon into the greatest city the world had ever seen. Do you know, in Babylon, we built these walls. And they were so wide. They were like a 6-lane highway completely around the city. 8 stories tall. Yeah. And in that wall, we had these amazing gates. You've never seen gates like these gates. And I named each gate for one of our great gods. And you might have heard of my wife. She is an amazing, beautiful lady. I wanted to give her something that nobody had ever seen before. So I got together with my designers, and we created these gardens, these beautiful gardens. It looked like they were hanging, just hanging. And that's what we ended up calling them, the hanging gardens. And nobody had ever seen anything like it. In fact, they became known as one of the 7 wonders in the known world. And I was building this city and this nation, and I was just celebrating how the gods, my gods, had given me success. Nothing had been better in my life. I mean, I had perfect health. My family was healthy. We were strong. My palace was beautiful. My city was great. My kingdom was so big. We covered, well, you call it the Middle East. I had control over almost the entire Middle East. My gods had made me successful. I had everything. Well, I didn't tell anybody, but I was missing one thing. I didn't have peace. I didn't tell people about it, but I didn't have peace. You know, the dreams started up again. They came back, but they were different this time, and they were worse. And when I woke up, I was terrified. I would wake up sometimes screaming. Sometimes I'd wake up and I would be crying, sobbing. Sometimes I'd wake up and I'd just be shaking and sweating. And I was scared. Was this the Most High God speaking to me something terrible? I didn't really even want to know what it was, but they wouldn't go away. And so finally I called Daniel, my top advisor. Daniel told me that yes, God was speaking directly to me, that God, and I like this part, that God saw me as a great, strong tree. Strong and massive. But that because of my pride and my refusal to acknowledge him, he was going to cut me down. And that I would become like a wild animal living in the fields until I would acknowledge him as the greatest, great God. And Daniel looked at me in all earnestness and pleaded with me, acknowledge the God Most High. This doesn't have to happen to you. And then Daniel left. And I was scared. And so I tried to make a change. I tried to clean up the way I talked to people. I even cleaned up my language. And because I was trying to change how I dealt with people, I even went to my enemies and I tried to find a way to make peace instead of just crushing them. People noticed that I was trying to change. I tried to spend time not just making my kingdom great, but I went and I found the people that were poor and I tried to help them and tried to lift them up a little bit. I invested in the temples for the gods. And I tried to spend more time even with my family. And I would have done more. But everything was going so good. My kingdom just kept growing. My success just kept on growing. And frankly, after a few weeks and months, I forgot about those dreams. Everything was so good. And I walked out one day onto the roof of my palace. And it was a beautiful, clear, bright, sunny day. And my city was glowing. I thought, oh my, look at this. Look at all that I've done. Nobody in the history of earth has built what I have built. I'm the greatest at everything that's ever been accomplished by man. It's almost like I'm a god. Look at me. And then I was in trouble. I don't really remember what happened next, just darkness. My advisors tell me that I became like a crazy, wild man animal. They couldn't talk to me, so I just went crazy. I went out to the fields and I rolled in the grass and the dirt. They said I ate grass. They couldn't take care of me. My hair grew long. My nails grew out. They said they were like some wild bird claws. And they just left me out there. They couldn't do anything with me. So they left me out there, and when people would ask about the king, they would say, well, they just covered up. They said, the king is sick. The king is sick. And that's where I was for 7 years. So I don't remember much about those 7 years, but one day, at the end of those 7 years, I was looking up at the sky, and I began to mutter. The Most High rules. The Most High, he rules. The Most High rules. And every time I said that, it was like I was coming out from the darkness, out from the dream. My mind began to get clear. I began to understand things. And I wasn't the same person because now I knew who I was. I was a man. But there was a God, the Most High God. And with that clarity that I had at that moment, I knelt in the grass. I put my hands in the air. And I said, his kingdom is everlasting. He rules from generation to generation. He does what he pleases in the heavens and here on earth. No one has the power to hold back his hand. No one can question him. And as I celebrated, and as I praised the God of gods, and my sanity was restored, I looked towards the palace, and there were men running towards me. Daniel was amongst the first to come to me. They took me back into the palace. Within hours, I was completely cleaned up. I was sitting on my throne. And my city and my country prospered even more. But I was not the same man. No. Because I knew that I was not God. And I wasn't a wild animal. I was a man who knew the God of gods, the King of kings, and that God rules. You might not be a king like me, but each one of you, you're sitting on the throne of your life. You're sitting on your own throne, and maybe you think that you're in control. Maybe you think or have thought that you don't have time for God. Maybe you've thought that the God that I'm talking about is just for weak people, not sharp people like you, strong people with a plan that know how to get things done. I just want to remind you of the story. This is my story. This happened. And pride wears so many disguises. Maybe you're a religious person. You grew up in this church or a church like this. And so you know about God and religion, and you're just like me. I grew up with the temples. I knew about the gods. You grew up in the church, and you know the rules, and you know about God, and you're comfortable with those, just like I was. And you're proud that you have the right religion and you do the right things and that God blesses you with the success that you have and the strength that you have. But if you really examine yourself, you're not proud of God. You're not proud of God for who he is as ruler and proud that he's allowed you to come and worship and serve him. You're just proud of yourself. Or maybe you're just a proud hypocrite. Your pride lets you think that you can live your life in front of people one way, and they'll look at you and respect you. But on the inside in your private life, you're a mess. There is sin there that no one knows about. And your pride lets you think that God doesn't care and that he's going to let you get away with that. God wants to warn you through my story. He is the God that rules. And he can't stand pride because it takes you from him and takes you away from letting him rule in your life. God wants you to turn away from the sin if it's holding you back. He wants you to humble yourself now, or he will have to humble you later. Pride is a dangerous thing. I know, because that's my story. Let's pray.